I spent 6 months designing a $200,000 project that could change my career, but my boss and teammates stole it, erased my name, and fired me in front of the client. They thought I'd stay silent, broke, and humiliated. Instead, I gathered proof, exposed their lies, and turned their betrayal into the moment that destroyed them, while launching my own studio. Let me start from the beginning, sweaty. I used to believe that hard work spoke for itself, that if you poured your heart into something, every sleepless night, every sketch, every detail refined until your hands shook from exhaustion, people would notice, people would respect it, and maybe, just maybe, you'd finally get the recognition you'd been killing yourself for. But the day I watched my boss and my so-called teammate stand in front of a prestigious client and present my project as if it were theirs, I realized how naive I'd been. And that realization burned hotter than any humiliation I had ever felt in my life. The project wasn't just a set of blueprints, it wasn't just a file on my computer, it was 6 months of my life. 6 months of chasing perfection on a design contract valued at $200,000, the biggest opportunity of my career. The kind of project that could have cemented my reputation in the architecture world, and in one slick, polished presentation they gutted me, erased me, like I had never existed at all. I sat at the back of the conference room that morning, my notes clutched in my trembling hands, ready to walk the client through every curve of the design, every innovation I had fought to include, when suddenly my boss cleared his throat and said, "Actually, Daniel and I will be taking this one," dismissing me with a smile that was more like a knife, and, before I could even protest, the projector lit up with slides I had created, sketches I had stayed up all night perfecting, models that had been rendered on my own laptop, all stripped of my name, repackaged under theirs. My chest tightened as I watched Daniel, the colleague I had once trusted, strut confidently through the opening lines of my pitch, his voice rehearsed on the very script I had written, while my boss nodded along as though he had been the genius behind it all. The clients leaned forward, impressed, jotting notes, asking questions, and every answer he gave was a sentence I had rehearsed alone in my apartment at 2 a.m., with empty coffee cups and aching eyes. My throat burned as I whispered, "That's mine," but no one heard. No one even glanced my way, and when the applause finally came, it wasn't for me, it was for them, the thieves who had gutted months of my work in broad daylight. The client smiled, shook my boss's hand, and said the words I had been dreaming of. "We're excited to move forward with this. The $200,000 budget sounds perfect." My ears rang, the room tilted, and I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Before I could collect myself, my boss turned to me, his smile sharp as broken glass, and said, "We appreciate your support, but we'll be handling the rest of this project internally. Effective immediately, your involvement is no longer required." It took me a second to realize what he was really saying. I was being cut out, fired from the very project I had built from the ground up. Daniel had the nerve to glance at me with something like pity, but it only made me want to scream, because his eyes told me everything that he had known, that he had gone along with it, that betrayal had been planned long before I walked into that room. I packed my things in silence that afternoon, shoving my notebooks, my pencils, and the tiny desk plant I had kept alive for 3 years into a cardboard box, while my coworkers avoided my gaze, some pretending to type, others whispering as I walked past, their pity suffocating me more than their silence. By the time I stepped out of the glass doors into the gray city streets, the wind biting at my face, I felt hollow, like the marrow had been drained from my bones, but underneath the grief, underneath the humiliation, a spark flickered. That night, in my tiny apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my career, I opened my laptop one last time, scrolling through the files they thought they had erased, and there it was, a hidden folder, time-stamped, watermarked with my name, containing every draft, every revision, every email showing the project had been mine from the beginning. My hands shook as I clicked through the evidence, a fire slowly kindling in my chest. They thought they had destroyed me, that I would slink away in silence while they pocketed $200,000 of glory. But they were wrong. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The days after that meeting blurred together into a haze of shame, anger, and disbelief, the kind that keeps you awake at night replaying the same scene over and over, wondering if you should have stood up, screamed, flipped the conference table, and shouted, "That's my work." But the truth is I froze, and now the fallout was mine alone to carry. I walked out of that glass building with a cardboard box in my arms and 6 months of my life stolen, and instead of colleagues rallying to my side or clients asking for my version of the story, all I got were whispers and silence. The company sent me a bland HR email the next morning, thanking me for my contribution and reminding me to return my key card, as if erasing me from their project and their payroll was as casual as deleting a file. Rent was due in 2 weeks, my savings barely covered groceries, and the thought of explaining to my parents that I had lost not just my job but my dignity kept me from answering their calls. I spent hours staring at my resume, trying to dress up my experience, but each rejection email landed faster than the last, some not even bothering with a polite excuse. One recruiter let it slip in hushed tones that my boss had already poisoned the well, spreading rumors that I was unstable and couldn't handle pressure, words that lodged in my chest like splinters because they weren't just lies. They were the exact opposite of the truth. I had handled everything, carried everyone, only to be discarded like trash when it was time to collect the prize. The nights were worse than the days. I'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying Daniel's smug smile, the client's approving nod, the sound of applause that should have been mine, each memory like a stone crushing my ribs. Sometimes I thought about giving up completely, about packing my things and moving back home, admitting defeat, letting them win, but every time I hovered on the edge of despair, I'd remember the hidden folder sitting on my laptop, the drafts and emails that proved the truth, and I'd feel the faintest ember of defiance. Still, that ember wasn't enough to keep the cold out when the bills piled up on my kitchen counter and the fridge grew emptier by the day. I took freelance gigs designing kitchen remodels and tiny office spaces, projects so far below my skill level they felt like mockery, but I needed money to survive. Even if it meant my talent was wasted while Daniel and my boss flaunted my $200,000 project in glossy magazines. The betrayal spread further than I expected. Friends from the office stopped returning my messages, either too afraid of retaliation or too eager to align themselves with the winners. And one night I saw a photo on LinkedIn of Daniel shaking hands with the client, my design spread behind them on a massive screen, my stomach twisting so violently I thought I'd be sick. It wasn't just professional ruin, it was personal, like they had stolen not just my work but my identity. But then, one late evening, as I scrolled through my inbox, deleting overdue bill reminders, I saw a new message that made my breath hitch. It was from the client. Not Daniel, not my boss, but the actual client, addressed directly to me. The subject line read, "Questions about the original design." My hands shook as I clicked it open, eyes scanning the words that felt like a crack of light through the suffocating dark. "Emily, I know you are no longer with the firm, but certain details in the project we were shown don't align with earlier drafts. Could we discuss?" I sat there frozen, the glow of the screen painting my face in blue, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might explode. For weeks I had been drowning, convinced I had no allies, no hope, nothing left but scraps, and now, suddenly, the very people Daniel and my boss had tricked were reaching out to me, confused, suspicious, maybe even open to hearing the truth. My despair didn't vanish instantly. The weight of betrayal was still crushing, but in that moment, the ember inside me roared into a spark. They thought they had buried me, but maybe they had just handed me the shovel I needed to dig my way out, and if I played this right, I wasn't just going to claw back my name, I was going to drag theirs through the dirt for the whole world to see. The client's email became the lifeline I hadn't realized I was waiting for, and as I sat staring at the glowing screen, my pulse racing so hard it felt like thunder in my veins, I knew I had a choice. I could ignore it, keep surviving on scraps, let the firm continue parading my work as their own, or I could seize the chance, risk everything, and fight back. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for what felt like hours before I finally typed out a careful reply, my words professional but sharp, explaining that I was the original creator of the design, that every detail they had admired came from my drafts, and that I had evidence to prove it. When I hit send, my stomach flipped, half with terror, half with exhilaration, because there was no undoing it now. I had just declared war. The next day, the client responded, asking if I could meet with their board privately to discuss discrepancies they had noticed between my early concepts and the presentation given by my boss and Daniel. Reading their words was like watching a dam crack. Suddenly, the flood I had been holding back roared through me, a surge of rage and vindication. But I wasn't reckless anymore. This time, I would be prepared. I spent the next week gathering every shred of evidence, combing through the hidden folder on my laptop, pulling up timestamped drafts, emails where Daniel had praised my brilliant solution, even Slack messages where my boss had told me to polish this for the pitch in his exact words. Each file became a weapon, and I labeled them meticulously, building a digital arsenal. Still, I knew evidence alone wouldn't topple them. I needed someone who understood the battlefield better than I did. That's when I reached out to a lawyer recommended by a friend of a friend, a sharp woman named Karen who specialized in intellectual property. When I walked into her office with a binder full of documents, she leafed through them slowly, her eyebrows arching higher with each page, and finally looked up at me with a small, fierce smile. "Emily, you don't just have a case," she said. "You have a story that any judge would want to hear." The words sent a shiver down my spine. For the first time, I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting, I was right. Karen laid out a strategy. We'd gather affidavits, lock down my drafts with notarized timestamps, and prepare to file a claim not just against Daniel, but against the entire firm for theft of intellectual property. My chest burned with something I hadn't felt in months, hope, but she cautioned me to move carefully, to anticipate their retaliation. And retaliation came faster than I expected. A week later, I received a letter from the firm's legal team, filled with venom disguised as formal language, accusing me of violating confidentiality agreements, of attempting to undermine the firm's reputation, threatening to sue me if I pursued any further contact with the client. My hands shook as I read it, but instead of fear, a grim smile crept across my face, because if they were this desperate to shut me up, it meant they were scared. Karen told me not to reply, not to panic, but to keep building my case. Meanwhile, the client's suspicions only grew. They asked for a meeting in person, promising discretion, and when I walked into that sleek boardroom, my binder tucked under my arm like armor, I felt both terrified and invincible. I laid out everything. The drafts with metadata showing creation dates months before Daniel's so-called input, the email chains where I was clearly the one leading the project, the side-by-side comparison of my models against the slides they had presented. Identical down to the shading. The board members exchanged glances, whispering among themselves, and though they didn't give me an answer then, their nods told me they knew the truth. Still, I left the meeting shaken, because truth wasn't always enough, power mattered, and my boss had plenty of it. That night, as I sat in my apartment eating reheated noodles, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and the voice on the other end was Daniel's. "You need to stop this," he hissed, his tone dripping with panic barely hidden under anger. "You're playing with fire, Emily. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it." For a moment, the old me, the one who froze in that first meeting, almost backed down. But then I thought about the 10,000 times I had doubted myself, the cardboard box in my arms, the rejection emails, the empty fridge, and the fury came roaring back. I let the silence stretch until he muttered, "Don't say I didn't warn you," and hung up. My hands trembled as I lowered the phone, but my decision was already carved into stone. They wanted me scared. They wanted me silent. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. No, I was going to burn their lies to the ground, even if it meant walking through fire to do it. The day of the showdown arrived faster than I expected, though in truth I had been living it in my head every night, rehearsing the words I would say, the documents I would show, imagining their faces when the lies they had built came crashing down. When the client's board called for a joint meeting with the firm, I knew this was my moment, and though my knees shook as I walked into that towering glass building again, binder in hand like a shield, my resolve was iron. The conference room looked the same as it had the day they stole everything from me: sleek table, panoramic windows, polished screens, but this time I wasn't the trembling assistant sitting in the shadows. I was the storm they had tried to bury. My boss and Daniel were already seated when I entered, their smiles brittle, their suits sharper than knives, and the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes, fiddling with his pen, while my boss leaned back in his chair with a smirk that screamed arrogance, as if he still believed power would protect him. The clients filed in, their expressions unreadable, and Patricia, the head of their board, gestured for everyone to sit. "We've received conflicting information," she said evenly, her gaze sweeping across the room, "and today, we expect clarity." My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might drown out my words, but when my boss started his practice spiel about how the project had been a team effort led by Daniel and myself, I cut in, my voice clear and strong, surprising even me. "That's a lie." The room froze. For the first time, all eyes were on me, and though my hands trembled under the table, I lifted the binder and slid it across to Patricia. Every draft, every sketch, every model in that project was mine. They erased my name, stole my work, and presented it as their own. Patricia flipped through the binder, her brows furrowing as she studied the timestamps, the metadata, the side-by-side comparisons I had painstakingly assembled. My boss laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "This is desperate," he sneered. "She was an assistant at best. We refined her rough ideas into something usable, refined." I snapped, slamming down a printed email chain where he had written, "Emily, this design is brilliant. Polish this for the pitch." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face went pale, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Patricia looked up slowly, her voice like steel. "Is this your email?" My boss stammered, his smirk faltering, and for the first time I saw cracks in the mask of control he always wore. The board members leaned in as I unveiled more, Slack messages where Daniel praised my leadership, early drafts saved under my username, models dated months before Daniel even joined the project. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer, and with each strike, their confidence crumbled. "She's twisting things," Daniel blurted out finally, his voice breaking. "She was unstable, difficult to work with, everyone knows that enough." Patricia cut him off sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. The clients exchanged whispers, some shaking their heads, others glaring at my boss and Daniel with open disgust. My chest burned with adrenaline, but beneath it was a fierce, steady calm. For the first time since that awful day, I wasn't invisible, I wasn't erased, I was undeniable. My boss tried one last gambit, leaning forward, his tone oily. "We can resolve this internally, there's no need for drama," but Patricia silenced him with a raised hand. "There will be no more lies. The board will deliberate, and we will decide how to proceed." I was dismissed from the room as they began their discussion, my legs shaky as I stepped into the hallway, but Alex, one of the junior designers who had quietly supported me, caught my arm and whispered, "You did it." I saw their faces. "They know." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, my whole body trembling with the release of months of rage and fear. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at me. What if the firm's influence was too strong? What if money and power outweighed truth? The minutes crawled like hours until finally, the doors opened and Patricia stepped out, her expression grave but resolute. "We'll announce our decision tomorrow morning," she said simply, her eyes meeting mine. My stomach dropped, the cliffhanger of a lifetime tightening around my chest, because tomorrow everything would either collapse or begin anew, and I had no choice but to wait, teetering on the edge of triumph or ruin. The next morning felt like walking into the eye of a storm, too quiet, too heavy, every breath sharp as glass, because I knew when I stepped into that boardroom, the decision waiting for me would either bury me forever or finally vindicate everything I had fought for. I barely slept, my binder clutched on my desk like a weapon, my phone buzzing with messages I didn't answer. My reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable, tired eyes, a fire in my chest, and a whisper in my head repeating this. "Is it?" When I arrived, Daniel was already there, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, tapping his pen like a ticking bomb, while my boss leaned back in his chair with forced confidence, though the twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. The clients filed in, their faces stern, their silence thick, and Patricia took her place at the head of the table. For a moment, no one spoke, the air so tense I thought I'd suffocate, until Patricia's voice cut through it like a blade. "After reviewing all evidence," she said slowly, her gaze sweeping across the table, "we have concluded that the original author of the $200,000 project was not Daniel, nor was it your firm's leadership. It was Emily. The words hit me like a thunderclap, my chest tightening, my eyes burning, because for the first time, the truth was out loud, undeniable, irreversible. My boss opened his mouth to argue, but Patricia's hand went up. Not only did you misrepresent the work of your own employee, you attempted to erase her entirely. This board does not partner with liars. Daniel's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the table, his face draining of color. Patricia continued, her tone cold enough to freeze blood. Effective immediately, we are terminating our contract with your firm, and we will be exploring legal remedies for the damages caused by this misrepresentation. Emily, we would like to discuss with you directly the possibility of continuing this project, independently. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, the room spinning as the meaning sank in. I hadn't just exposed them, I had stolen back everything they thought they had taken, and more. My boss slammed his hand against the table, muttering about lawsuits, about confidentiality agreements, but his voice sounded small now, powerless, swallowed by the weight of his downfall. Daniel tried to plead, his voice cracking as he said he had been pressured, that he had no choice, but no one was listening anymore. The power they had wielded so effortlessly just weeks ago was gone, replaced by silence, shame, and the undeniable evidence I had dragged into the light. When the meeting ended, the board members shook my hand, their grip firm, their words full of respect I had long since stopped expecting, and as I walked out of that room, past Daniel's slumped shoulders and my boss's furious glare, I felt taller, steadier. Like I had grown into someone unrecognizable from the woman who had once sat invisible at the back of the same room. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Industry forums buzzed with whispers about the scandal. Colleagues who had once ignored me reached out with apologies, and the firm's reputation crumbled as clients pulled contracts one by one. My boss was quietly forced out, Daniel vanished from the industry altogether, and me, the woman they thought they had buried, took a leap I never would have dared before. I opened my own studio. At first it was small, just me and a rented space with peeling paint and secondhand furniture. But within months the project that had been stolen from me became my foundation, the board backing me directly, clients following because they trusted my vision, not the thieves who had tried to silence me. Some nights I'd sit in that office long after sunset, the city lights glittering outside, and think about how close I had come to giving up, how easy it would have been to let them win. But instead, I fought, and I turned their betrayal into the fire that forged me. Do I forgive them? No. Betrayal that deep doesn't earn forgiveness, it earns consequences. And I made sure they faced every single one. But do I regret what happened? Not anymore. Because without their treachery, I might never have discovered just how strong I could be, how far I was willing to go to defend what was mine. They thought they had stolen $200,000 of glory, but what they really did was hand me the keys to a future they'll never touch. And as I lock up my studio each night, my name etched on the glass door in gold, I smile knowing that the applause they stole from me that day echoes louder now than it ever could have then, because this time, it's real and it's mine.